Hello and welcome back. Today we're going to be looking at a very special project that I've been wanting to do for many years. As many of you are aware, Windows 95 is currently celebrating its 30-year anniversary, having released August 24th of 1995. Surely installing Windows and booting Windows is done so many times there can't be much to say, right? Well, this video is going to explore a very simple premise. Can you install and boot Windows 95 without a hard drive? As it turns out, yes, you can, but it's going to require a trick, or rather a series of tricks all stacked up in a trench coat, starting with just two 3.5-inch discs. Okay, so what's going on here? Well, let's meet the star of the show, the Smart Disk FlashPath adapter. It has no moving parts and draws power not from the floppy drive itself, but from two coin cell batteries installed right here on the back. This crazy fever dream of an adapter has more in common with those aux input tape cassette adapters converting the digital ones and zeros to magnetic analog flux transitions, and using a special driver is able to mount flash memory as if it was an oversized floppy disk. The first time I saw this on one of Cathode Ray Dude's amazing videos, something just totally lit up in the back of my mind. With the right driver and Windows, the adapter can actually read smart media cards up to about 64 megabytes in size. That should be plenty of space for a minimal Windows 95 installation. But we need a driver that works with DOS. And after scouring the web, there was indeed a driver for this very adapter. However, trying to use this driver only yielded support for up to 32 megabytes, and that's not nearly enough for even the most stripped down install of Windows. My guess is the DOS driver may predate DOS with FAT16 support. Given the earlier DOS limitation of 32 megabyte partitions, this does sort of make sense. So sure, 32 megabytes is more than you would get on a typical floppy disk, but nowhere near enough for a functional Windows 95 installation. Of course, there are a few lightweight Windows 95 and 98 projects floating around on the web. However, the goal was to use the original release install media. In this case, I have copies of, and shout out to WinWorld PC for preserving all of this for so long, original OEM, totally legit OEM release of Windows 95 here on CD-ROM. And of course, what hacker would be complete without all 14 original Windows 95 install floppies? So we're going to use one of these to go ahead and install Windows 95. As an aside, if you ever wondered how Windows 95 or Microsoft fit the entire installer for Windows 95 on floppies, I recommend checking out a video by Tech Tangents where he goes over the ins and outs of the distribution media format which they used here on these floppies. Of course, there is a regular boot disk that is the normal size, but the remainder of the disks, once it's loaded into DOS, it's able to actually read more than 1.44 megs from each of those disks. That's pretty cool. So with only 32 megabytes to play with, it kind of seemed like this was never going to work. But what if we used another trick, or rather two of them? So what about RAM drives and compression? Perhaps a RAM drive of around 64 megabytes used to install Windows, and then we simply compress a zip archive back to the FlashPath adapter. So we could load 32 megabytes of a zip archive from the FlashPath, expand that to our RAM disk, and then boot Windows 95 from there. Well, after trying many times and failing to use the DOS-based pkzip to facilitate this process, it seemed like this idea may be totally dead in the water. I've tried it many times, but it seemed like there was a breakdown in the file attributes like hidden, system, read-only, and the issue seemed to compound each time the archive was expanded and recompressed, so I put the project on ice again. That is, until another trick entered the ring. Thanks to another video by Bits and Bolts, another idea came to mind. What if we used Microsoft's DoubleSpace, or DriveSpace as it was later known, to handle the file compression on the fly? We could mount a compressed volume from the FlashPath adapter as a disk nearly double in size, and even better, Windows 95 had inbuilt support for booting from DriveSpace compressed volumes. So that should be a perfect fit. Well, that's where our FlashPath DOS driver sort of breaks down. It seems as though DriveSpace loses its connection to the physical block device as Windows 95 boots. Okay, so what if we put all of our tricks together? Let's try copying the compressed volume from the FlashPath adapter to the RAM drive, mounting the DriveSpace compressed volume from the RAM drive as a virtual disk, and finally, I think we have a workable and repeatable setup, albeit a bit slow, convoluted, esoteric, and absolutely impractical. So let's jump in and start by installing Windows 95, and as you'll see, there's going to be a few more pitfalls and tricks left to discover, but I think we have all of the ingredients. We have a bootable floppy disk to load our FlashPath driver, and then we can load more than 32 megabytes of data onto our RAM drive using our FlashPath adapter. So let's get right to it. So let's get some of this stuff out of the way, and we're going to take a quick look at the FlashPath adapter under Windows, because with the driver we're actually able to read this disk. So I just wanted to take a quick look at this, and actually the first way I'm going to do that is by taking one of these Smart Media Adapter PCM-CIA cards, and we will go ahead and insert the card into the, of course we got to do it the correct way. And let's jump over to our Toshiba laptop. And yeah, this is the same one that I repaired in my last video and upgraded to 128 megs of RAM. And hopefully you sort of see why the additional RAM was going to be necessary for this project. I'm going to go ahead and switch over to a capture. So here we have the desktop. Obviously mouse moving around. So I'm going to go ahead and insert this adapter, and this will give us a very fast way to access the files on the card because, not to spoil anything, but the FlashPath adapter is rather slow. So I'm going to go ahead and wait for Windows to detect and mount that card. There we go. And hopefully the autoplay just comes up. Yep, there we go. So 0 bytes on the card. And as we can see, it is a 32 megabyte Smart Media card. So here I'm just going to go ahead and create one file, just a text document, so we can keep track. I'm going to say hello 95, and we'll put some text in here. And we'll save and close that. And there's our file on the card. So I'm going to go ahead and eject this. And now if we eject our Smart Media card, and I'm going to take this and insert it into the FlashPath adapter. Now, unfortunately, this thing will let you insert the card both ways, but there is a handy picture here on the bottom that kind of gives us an orientation. So I'll go ahead and insert that into our FlashPath adapter, get that into the computer, and now if I open up the floppy drive, and this does tend to take a little bit of time. It's not a very fast file access of this Smart Media card over the FlashPath adapter, but hey, look at that. We can see our Hello 95 file, and if we open it up, there's our contents. So not very surprising that we can store a 22 byte file onto a 32 megabyte volume, but now let's reboot back into DOS and we'll start to see a bit more of this process. So I'm going to go ahead and shut down Windows here. And I'm going to go ahead and remove the hard drive from this computer. So let's turn it back over, and yeah, you can still see one of those numbers from previous repair video. So let's go ahead and get this drive out of here. I don't want anything to conflict with what we're about to do. There we go. There's our hard drive removed. It's one of those kind of old school SSDs for IDE. So we'll go ahead and put this to the side. And we'll go ahead and flip our laptop back over. And if we turn it on now, we should get an error about there not being a hard drive. Oh, it's outputting. Yeah, it always wants to output to the VGA by default. So let's see. Yeah, okay. So we're stuck on the splash screen here. It won't let me switch the display yet. And yeah, this does take a second, but here we see the HDC error up here at the top. So now it's stuck here and it doesn't know what to do. So I'm going to go ahead and turn this thing back off, and we're going to go ahead and boot from a very specially prepared Windows 95 FlashPath boot diskette. Put this together, it has a series of utilities on here, and we'll go through a little bit more of that as it starts to boot up. So I'm going to go ahead and get the computer turned back on, and it's going to take it a second just because it's going to be a little bit upset that there's no hard drive in here. So I'll give this just a second to pass the BIOS screen. Okay, there we go, HDC error. And it should start to boot from our floppy drive. Awesome, there we go, starting Windows 95. So it's not actually starting Windows 95, this is just a Windows 95 boot disk. And let me move this just out of the way so we can get a little bit better view of the log message here. What we can see here is that the very first thing is it's pretty upset that we're loading a version of DriveSpace that is not for this version of DOS. Now, this is because we're using the DOS 6.2.2 version of DriveSpace, not the Windows 95 version of DriveSpace. And there's a very good reason for this. First of all is that there is no, at least that I can find, command line interface for interacting with the Windows 95 version of DriveSpace. So even though we need the Windows 95 DOS 7.1 environment to be able to boot Windows 95, we're not able to actually use Windows 95's version of DriveSpace. But we can just ignore this message and we'll go ahead and hit any key to continue running. And the next thing it's going to do is go ahead and detect our CD-ROM. And I think we'll use that to install Windows 95, since booting it from installing Windows 95 from a stack of floppies is going to take quite some time. So to speed that up, I think we'll go ahead and install from the CD instead. Next thing it does is set up our FlashPath driver. And also it goes ahead and sets up a RAM drive. So the purpose is this disk is going to copy all of the contents from the disk over to that RAM drive and then switch the command line environment so that we can take our disk out and we're no longer referencing any of the files on the floppy disk. So this takes a couple of seconds. Awesome, there we go. And I'm just going to move this again. So here we have I prepared a little echoed out screen of some of the basic information of how to use this particular disk. So we have a couple of options. Each of them we can start by running the fp command. So what we can do is we can set up our RAM drive, we can launch the setup from a CD, we can save our RAM drive contents back to our FlashPath adapter, and also load our contents from the FlashPath adapter. So actually the first thing I'm gonna go ahead and do is we're gonna go ahead and reinsert our FlashPath adapter now that we can take out our floppy disk that we used to boot the computer. And so if we pop in our FlashPath adapter, I should be able to do a dir on A, and we should see our text file. And yeah, there it is. There's our hello95.txt. Fantastic. So I'm going to go ahead and eject this for now. And what I'm going to go ahead and do is start with one of the most basic commands, and that is to set up the RAM drive. So I'm going to go ahead and do an fp create RAM. And so what this has just done is it's created a drive space compressed volume on our RAM drive, and it's mounted that drive as drive X. So if we take a look at Z, our RAM drive, we now have several files on here. But most notably, you can see that there's not much free space left. I only created a 32 megabyte RAM drive, and then a little bit of that is filled up with the contents of the boot diskette, and then the majority of it is filled up with this DriveSpace.001 file, and that's about 30 megabytes in size. But if we go over to our X drive, here we have a completely blank drive with over 60 megabytes of free space. So now, next, what we can do, and if you ever get confused about the commands that are available in this FP file, you can just type FP and it'll give you kind of a breakdown of what we want to do. So the next thing that we want to do is we're going to go ahead and insert our Windows 95 setup CD into our disk drive, like so. And I'm going to go ahead and run fp setup cd. And so this is going to launch the setup from the drive here with a couple of those options that are available in the setup.exe predefined. Mainly things like skipping memory check, skipping scan disk, and it also does one other very important thing, which is to set up a substitute of our X drive as C. So if I go to C right now, there is no drive. And if I try to run, let's see, what was our... Yeah, so R is our CD-ROM. So here, if I tried to run setup from here directly, there would actually be a problem where the Windows 95 setup won't start properly. So I'm actually going to demonstrate that by just running this with a few of the command line switches. So I'm going to run setup without memory, without disk space, and without scan disk. So if I try to run setup from here, it will go ahead and initialize correctly. And I can click continue. And it's going to preload in some of the files that it needs. I can click yes. And if I click next, copy all files to my computer, other directory, x:/Windows, and I click next, here we run into our first major hurdle. So this is an error, and I'm not really sure what it's about, but it seems to be about the fact that Windows really can't detect any usable drives on this computer, at least in the upper drive letters, you know, C, D, etc. So what we're going to do is just go ahead and let that fail out. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and now launch the FP, the FlashPath version of the setup, and it's going to go ahead and run the setup from the CD just as we were before when we accessed the CD directly, only this time it's going to go ahead and set up our substitute automatically for us. So I'm going to do FP setup CD, and it's going to start this Windows setup from our CD, and as we can see, the first error here is about that substitute command. It's upset that we're doing this, but this is actually a good thing, and so we're going to go ahead and ignore this error by hitting escape. And it's going to do again the same thing. It's going to go ahead and preload the Windows setup, get a few things ready, and hopefully we'll be able to continue past where we ran into an error before. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and click yes. And we're going to copy all files to my computer, and we're going to install in an other directory, and we're going to install in x:/Windows. And as you can see, we're now not hindered by that error that we were getting previously. So I'm going to go ahead and do a fairly compact install of Windows. Okay, and we'll just get our product code enter here. So go ahead and blow through this part. You can find these serial codes on the WinWorld PC page for Windows 95. We'll go ahead and click next. And we'll let it detect the hardware, and so this might take a couple of minutes. And while it's doing that, I think I will adjust the image here. Let's see if we can get that to better fit the screen. Gosh, I don't know if that's any better. Yeah, that's a little bit better once it's displaying to both at the same time. All right, so now we should be able to blow through the rest of the setup here. And I'm going to go ahead and just select a few additional components just so we can have a little bit of fun. I'm going to go ahead and install some games and also MS Paint. But as you can see right now, we are dangerously running close to our available size. And so this is kind of interesting about the Windows 95 setup is that I guess it overestimates the amount of disk space it'll need, or maybe it needs some space and then it doesn't need that space at a later stage. But either way, this is okay that we're blowing past our available space a little bit. So go ahead and click OK here. And next. And I'm going to skip creating a startup disk because, of course, we already have one. So I'm going to click No there. And we're going to go ahead and fully install Windows 95. And this should blow through rather quickly because it's reading the files from the CD here and it's copying them to our DriveSpace volume, which is hosted on our RAM drive. So really it's a RAM-backed compressed disk that we're installing to. And it's very important that at most stages of this process that you carefully read the dialogues and whether they're asking you to shut down the computer, restart the computer, because it's very easy to, because we're currently installing to a RAM disk, is once you power off the computer, those files are lost forever. And of course, we want to be able to save them to our FlashPath adapter. So this should complete here in just a few minutes. And just like that, in a matter of minutes, Windows 95 has been successfully installed. But now we actually get a look at that error that we had prior. So the first time we tried to run Windows 95 setup, when we weren't running the substitute command, we got this error before we installed Windows. Now we get this same error afterwards. And actually, it's a really good thing that we get this error here because Windows 95, the installer, is going to immediately want to restart the computer, which would, of course, obliterate the contents of our RAM drive. So this is actually a very convenient error because now we can exit the Windows 95 installation by clicking OK, and now we're back into DOS. And if we take a look at our RAM drive, of course, we still have our DriveSpace file. Somewhere on here, let's do a /w. Yeah, so there we have our double space or our DriveSpace.001 file, which is our compressed volume. And if we head over to the X drive, this is where we have installed Windows. And as you can see, we actually have a good bit of free space now that the Windows 95 installation is complete. The next thing we want to be able to do is actually start Windows, and that's where the FP script comes in handy once again. With this, we can actually run Windows, and this is important to run it using this command because Windows doesn't like to point the registry location. It's very weird. I'm not really sure what's going on and why this is the case. But unless we run a very specific utility prior to running Windows, which is effectively, I think, a utility that is designed to allow Windows to boot over network volumes and thus work with a shared registry file, if we just tried to run Windows now, we would get a litany of errors about not being able to access the registry. So instead what I'm going to do is I'm going to do fpwin, which should run those necessary commands to set up the registry location, and also just go ahead and kick us into Windows. So I'm going to run fpwin, and it says it's set our registry location, and now it's going to go ahead and start Windows. And this is where we get another error. So now Windows 95 itself is upset that we're using a version of DriveSpace. So just like when we booted the computer with our boot floppy, Windows 95 is also rather upset that we're using a version of DriveSpace that is not associated with Windows 95, but that's okay. We're just going to hit any key to continue. We're just going to ignore all errors and keep moving. And so now we actually can run the Windows out of the box experience. So it's going to go ahead and run some setup here, and this might take a few minutes. And yep, we'll just go ahead and let Windows run through all of this first boot stuff here. And we'll go ahead and select a time zone. And we won't install a printer. Okay, and now this is very, very important. If you were to click this OK right here, right now, everything would be lost. And so it's a really good thing that it does ask if you want to reboot your computer. So what we're actually going to do is we're going to hit Control-Alt-Delete, bring up the Task Manager, and we're actually going to end the Windows setup. So I'm going to go ahead and just click End Task on this Windows setup. And boom, we're right into Windows 95. And so there's not a lot to do here yet, but I'm going to go ahead and shut down. And this is the next bit that is very important, is that when you shut down, you always want to restart the computer into MS-DOS mode. This doesn't actually restart the computer, it effectively just closes Windows and returns you to the previous command prompt. So I'm going to click Yes here. And as you can see, we're right back into DOS. And now if I run fpwin again, Windows is going to update some files. So pretend that we just restarted our computer. Again, same error about DriveSpace. We'll hit enter on that. And now we should be into Windows for the very first time. Awesome. So I'm going to click this to not show that every single time. I think we'll go ahead and make just a couple of changes to our install. So I'm going to go ahead and open up Solitaire. And it's going to be a bit controversial, but I'm going to draw one. And we'll set the deck to the sunset here. Okay, so now we have some Solitaire settings that have been applied. And we'll go ahead and open up MS Paint. And we'll go ahead and draw a little bit of text. We'll go ahead and save this. I guess we could give it a background color of some sort. It's not too crazy. All right, and then we're going to go ahead and save this just right on our desktop. And there we go. We have a file on our desktop, and I think I might actually set that as the desktop background. So let's browse, and we'll go to our desktop. Awesome. All right, it's definitely hideous, but we can see that we're booted with our, we'll know for sure that when we save this to our disk and reboot later, if we don't see this, then something has gone wrong. So again, I'm going to go ahead and shut down Windows here. Again, being very careful to not click either shutdown or restart unless you're very sure you want to lose the contents of the RAM drive. But instead, I'm going to go ahead and restart the computer into MS-DOS mode. So now that we're here back in DOS, let's go ahead and get our FlashPath adapter involved. So now what we can do, and I'll just do a dir on A, and we'll make sure that we can see our hello95 text file. And yeah, there we go, our hello95.txt, our 22-byte file. So if I head back over to the RAM drive, again running the fp command, what I want to do now is I want to fp save. And what this is going to do is it's going to unmount the compressed volume, and it's going to copy that DriveSpace.001 file to our FlashPath adapter. And this is about to kick off about a 10 to 15 minute process of how long it takes to save that. So I'm going to go ahead and click enter, and now we're saving the contents of our RAM drive to the FlashPath adapter. And I'm going to go ahead and let this finish, and it's going to take a minute, so be right back when it is.
I still have to tweak a bit.
And just like that, about 20 minutes later, it has saved our compressed volume to the FP disk. Fantastic. Let's do a dir on A and just make sure that that file is actually there. And yeah, there it is. There's our DriveSpace 001 file, about 30 megabytes in size. And, well, now we have our Windows 95 installation on our FlashPath disk. So what do we do now? Well, let's go ahead and just turn off the computer. And yeah, computer's completely off. Again, no hard drive installed. So let's go ahead and reboot the computer again with our FlashPath boot disk. And again, it'll take it just a second here to get past the BIOS screen because it's looking for the hard drive, which we have removed. HDC error, and it's going to go ahead and boot off of the floppy again. Again, we need to ignore the error. Awesome, and now we are booted fully up with the boot diskette, and we can remove that. And we can insert our FlashPath adapter. So the first thing that we can actually look at is X shouldn't be mounted at all, so invalid drive specification. And if we do a dir on our RAM drive, we see that we have 32 or 30-ish megabytes free here. And so what we want to do, and I'm going to do a dir on A, just make sure that we can still see our DriveSpace file. Awesome, looks like it's there. So now we can do an FP load, which will take our DriveSpace 001 file and copy it to our RAM drive. And while it's waiting to do that, be back in just a little bit.
And many more.
And there we go. The DriveSpace file has been successfully copied from our FlashPath adapter to the RAM drive. So we can actually take the FlashPath adapter out, and we'll go ahead and do a dir on our RAM drive. So there we have our DriveSpace 001 file. But if I do a dir on X, it's still not mounted. So going back to the FP script here, I'm going to go ahead and do an FP mount from RAM. And there we go. Mounted the RAM drive as a DriveSpace compressed volume from that file onto Drive X. And if we go over to X, well, here's our Windows installation with a whole 20 megabytes free. And now, going back to our FP script, if I run FP win, there we go. So Windows is again complaining about the DriveSpace version, but we'll go ahead and just hit a key there to continue. And just like that, we have booted Windows 95 from 2 floppy disks, using one regular disk to boot the computer and another one to copy our DriveSpace compressed volume into a RAM drive. So you can fully boot Windows 95 or potentially other operating systems using no hard drives, no CD-ROMs, nothing but a floppy drive attached to a computer. And that's it. Booting Windows 95 without a hard drive using only 2 clever floppy disks and a whole bag of tricks. If you've ever done anything like this, or maybe you have an idea on what I could have done differently, definitely let me know down in the comments. Massive shout outs to Cathode Ray Dude, Tech Tangents, and Bits and Bolts, and just the amazing retro tech community as a whole, without which this video would have never been possible. I'll link down to those respective videos if you want to learn more, and also a link to GitHub where you can download the FlashPath boot disk or just look through the files on here, just see how all of this is possible. And I hope if you like this video, you'll consider dropping a like and get subscribed to see more like this in the future. Definitely have more shenanigans planned, and I guess I'll see you in the next one. Bye!